You know what's worse than being forgotten? Being erased, while still holding the receipt. I paid for the wedding. Every flower, every dress fitting, every single chair. And then they sat me at table 12. I didn't yell, I didn't beg, I didn't threaten. I just canceled everything. Quietly. And watched them scramble in a backyard barbecue wedding live-streamed like a blooper reel. My name is Julianne. I was the woman they erased. And this is what happened after I stopped carrying the water for people who thought they were fireproof. I met Gregory on a Tuesday in early March, the kind of gray Portland day where the rain feels more like mist and you can smell damp cedar in the air. I was delivering custom centerpieces for a bridal shower at a local venue downtown. Hair, pulled-up sleeves, rolled hands covered in eucalyptus sap. He was there for a client meeting, standing beside a half-finished scale model of a mid-century home looking both focused and exhausted. I didn't notice him at first, but he noticed me. We talked briefly, something about the lighting being too warm for the color palette. Then again a week later at the same venue. And again. He started waiting outside my shop after work with takeout from local places I loved but hadn't visited in years. Quietly consistent. Calm. He was everything my past hadn't been. Gregory had a daughter, Ava. 11 years old. I remember the first time he mentioned her. We were sitting on my back porch drinking lemon ginger tea, and he said it like it was both a confession and a warning. I didn't flinch. I had my own daughter Leah, just 4 at the time. My whole life revolved around her. A man with a child didn't scare me. It comforted me in a way. Like we both came into this with the same kind of bruises. He told me Ava lived with her maternal grandparents in Florida after his wife passed away unexpectedly 3 years earlier. He visited her when he could send money, talked on the phone. But she hadn't lived under his roof in a long time. I could tell he carried guilt around that like a heavy coat he couldn't take off. I didn't judge him. Parenting is a maze even when you're fully present. From what I saw, he was trying. That mattered to me. And he treated Leah like someone precious, not just an accessory to dating me. He made her laugh. Helped her build a dollhouse with actual blueprints. She'd stand by the window around 5 every evening waiting to see if his truck would pull up. When he asked me to marry him a year later, she was the first one to say yes. The wedding was quiet, intimate, just a few friends and family in a garden I designed myself. I wore off-white linen and bare feet. Ava didn't come. She sent a card drawn in marker that said "Congratulations" in careful, straight handwriting. I took it as a beginning. Gregory and I talked for months about Ava moving in with us. He said she needed stability, something more than what she was getting with her grandparents. I agreed, though privately, I worried. It's one thing to love a child from a distance. It's another to build a life together inside the same 4 walls. Still, when the time came, we flew to Orlando, packed her things in 3 suitcases, and brought her home. She looked smaller than I expected. Quieter. Her eyes moved quickly, watching everything and giving nothing away. Leah, ever the extrovert, bounced around her new stepsister like a puppy, offering crayons and snacks, asking questions at machine gun speed. Ava nodded politely but didn't say much. The first night I made lasagna. Gregory's favorite. Leah picked out a movie, something animated and loud. Ava sat stiffly on the far end of the couch, hands folded, feet barely touching the floor. I caught her staring at a photo of Leah and me on the mantel. It was from a pumpkin patch the year before, both of us laughing, noses smudged with whipped cream from cider donuts. She looked away quickly when I noticed. I wanted to say something. To reach for her. But I didn't want to push. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. Mornings were hectic. Lunchboxes, hair ties, misplaced shoes. I learned Ava liked her sandwiches without crust, her socks folded, not rolled. She was neat. Precise. The kind of child who lines up her pencils by shade. Leah was chaos and glitter. Together they made the house feel full. Still there was a distance. Ava called me Julianne. Always Julianne. Not Mom. Not even Miss. Just Julianne. At first I told myself it didn't matter. Labels don't define love. But every time she said it, it landed somewhere deep and raw. Gregory didn't push her either. He was gentle, almost passive. He believed she would come around in time. I wanted to believe that too. One evening I found Ava in the hallway staring at our wedding photo. Gregory and I holding hands under a string of Edison bulbs, Leah tucked between us in her flower crown. Ava wasn't in it. She didn't speak. Just looked. Then turned away and walked to her room without a word. That night, as I tucked Leah in, she whispered, "I like having a big sister. Can she sleep in my room sometime?" I smiled and said, "Maybe soon, give her time." But something told me that time wasn't the only thing we'd need. Not for this. Not for what was coming. Some evenings Ava would sit at the kitchen island while I cooked, legs swinging slowly under the stool, her silence filling the space louder than words. I'd try to bring her in with little things. "Do you want to stir the sauce? Want to taste this before I add more salt?" She always shook her head politely, sometimes offering a soft no thank you, sometimes not answering at all. I learned quickly not to crowd her. Instead, I left small openings like folded napkins with a note tucked inside her lunchbox or setting her favorite yogurt on the top shelf of the fridge where she liked it. She never mentioned those things, but I noticed the notes stopped coming back and the yogurt disappeared steadily. Leah was sunshine, always dragging Ava into something. They played board games colored side by side, even made blanket forts in the living room. But Ava never really lost herself in it. She laughed, yes, but it was a cautious laugh, like she was waiting to see if it was okay to enjoy the moment. I started to see how hard she tried to stay neutral, to not let her guard down. A few weeks after she moved in, her birthday came. She was turning 12. I planned a small party, nothing big, just pizza, cupcakes, a few girls from school, and a movie night. Ava said she didn't want a party, but I could tell she wasn't used to being celebrated. So I kept it simple. She helped me pick out the vanilla and strawberry swirl for the frosting. I made sure the decorations weren't too bright or loud. She seemed more relaxed that week, like maybe we were turning a corner. The night of the party, she wore a soft blue sweater I'd picked out for her, the one with the tiny stitched stars along the sleeves. Her face lit up just for a moment when she saw the cupcakes lined up on the counter. She even let Leah hug her. I remember standing by the sink watching them together, thinking maybe this was it. Maybe this was the start. But later that night, when the guests had gone and we were cleaning up, Ava sat at the table pushing sprinkles into a napkin. She looked up and asked almost too casually, "Is it okay if I keep calling you Julianne?" I froze for a second, the sponge still in my hand. I mean, I know some kids say mom when they get a stepmom, but I already have a mom. And it feels weird. "Is that okay?" I smiled, or tried to. "Of course, sweetie. Whatever makes you comfortable." She nodded, her eyes back on the napkin. I finished cleaning in silence, my chest feeling hollow and too tight at the same time. Gregory and I sat in bed that night, lights off, the hum of the ceiling fan above us. I told him about the conversation. "She's just being honest," he said. "It's not personal. She's loyal to her mom, that's all. It'll change." But I wasn't sure. Ava wasn't unkind. She wasn't distant out of malice. She was protecting something, some piece of her that she didn't want to hand over. From that point on, the name Julianne felt like a fence between us. Every time she used it, it reminded me that I was not her mom, not really, not in the way I was to Leah. Still, I kept trying. I drove her to school, asked about her classes, cheered at her science fair presentation. I even stood in the rain for 2 hours at her middle school soccer game, clapping until my hands were numb. When she sprained her ankle during practice, I sat beside her in the ER holding her hand while they wrapped it. She didn't call for her dad. She didn't call for anyone. Just waited silently. She never pulled away from my help. But she never leaned in either. That winter, Leah caught the flu and was out of school for almost a week. I spent days juggling warm compresses, soup, laundry, and work. One night I walked into Ava's room to say goodnight. She was reading, a blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. "Thanks for taking care of Leah," she said softly, not looking up from her book. I hesitated. "Of course. She's my daughter." There was a pause. Then she glanced up. "Yeah. She's lucky." I smiled, unsure what to make of it. Part compliment, part distance. Later that week, I saw her sneaking an extra blanket into Leah's room. She thought no one noticed. I told myself to be patient. That love takes time. That not all bonds form with names or blood. But sometimes lying awake at night, I wondered if I was trying to build a bridge where she had already built a wall. Spring came. Ava started spending more time in her room. She decorated the walls with vintage postcards and cut-out quotes from books. I offered to help rearrange her furniture. She politely declined. One afternoon, I knocked before entering and found her on a video call with her grandmother in Florida. I waved and said hello. The woman barely acknowledged me. Ava ended the call quickly. I asked her if she wanted to visit for spring break. She shrugged and said maybe. Gregory was less involved than I'd hoped. He worked long hours, and when he was home, he tried not to rock the boat. He always said the right thing, but rarely at the right time. When I asked if we could go to therapy as a family, he said it wasn't necessary. That we were doing fine. But I knew we weren't. Or, at least I wasn't. Still, I packed her lunch every morning. I folded her laundry the way she liked. I waited. Not with desperation, but with quiet hope. That maybe someday she'd call me Mom by accident. That maybe it wouldn't feel weird to her anymore. That maybe she'd see I wasn't trying to replace anyone. I was just trying to love her in the only way I knew how. Ava turned 18 on a cold, wet morning in February. The sky was gray, the streets slick with last night's rain, and the smell of damp bark lingered outside our door. I'd been planning her birthday for months, not the party itself, she didn't want one, but the gift. Something that marked a turning point, a step into adulthood, a symbol of trust and love. Something a mother gives her daughter when she believes she's ready to carry the weight of freedom. I bought her a brand new Toyota Highlander, sleek and black with cream leather seats and all the safety features I could think of. I test drove 3 different models, read reviews for weeks, made sure it was fuel efficient and reliable. I even had it detailed and parked it in the driveway before sunrise, with a big silver bow across the hood. Next to the steering wheel, I left a small envelope with the key and a note inside. Happy birthday, Ava. I believe in you. Love, Julian. I remember waiting in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold, staring out the window like a teenager on prom night. When she finally stepped outside wearing a faded college hoodie and slippers, I held my breath. She stopped at the edge of the porch, looked at the car for a full 5 seconds, then turned to me and said flatly, "You got me a Toyota?" I blinked. "It's a Highlander," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It's one of the safest SUVs on the market. All-wheel drive. Great for college commutes." She opened the driver's side door and glanced inside, then looked back at me with that same expression she used when she found out I didn't stock oat milk. "I thought maybe you were getting the Porsche. Like the one Dad showed me last month." His friend's daughter got one for her 18th. I stood there for a moment, stunned, the silence between us as sharp as broken glass. Gregory stepped out behind her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked at the car, then at me, then back at Ava. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "this is a beautiful gift. You should thank Julianne." She shrugged, not looking at either of us, and walked back into the house. Gregory followed her, mumbling something I didn't catch. I stood alone in the driveway, the bow wilting in the morning drizzle. Later that afternoon, I found the envelope and note still sitting on the passenger seat. She hadn't even opened it. That night at dinner, Leah was unusually quiet. She pushed her food around the plate, glancing between me and Ava. Finally, she said softly, "That car is really nice. I'd love to have one like that someday." Ava didn't respond. She was busy scrolling on her phone, earbuds in one ear. Gregory stayed silent, 2 eyes fixed on his plate. I think he was hoping the tension would pass if he ignored it long enough. The rest of the week felt heavier somehow. Ava didn't mention the car again. She took the keys without a word, started driving to school on her own, rarely came home before dark. I stopped asking where she was going. I stopped leaving dinner out for her. She came and went like a tenant, not a daughter. One evening, I overheard her talking on the phone in her room. "Yeah, it's fine," she was saying. "Not what I wanted, but whatever. She means well, I guess." I stood in the hallway, heart sinking, hand resting against the doorframe. It was the first time in years I felt like an outsider in my own house. Leah noticed the shift too. She stopped inviting Ava to movie nights. They no longer shared snacks or inside jokes. The gap between them widened, quiet and sad. One morning over breakfast, Leah asked Mom, "Why doesn't Ava like being here?" I paused, trying to find an answer that didn't hurt. "I think Ava's still figuring out where she belongs," I said. "It's not easy blending families." But deep down I knew it wasn't just about blending. It was about rejection. A rejection that no amount of lasagna cupcakes or SUVs could soften. Gregory tried to smooth things over by suggesting we all go on a weekend trip together, maybe to Cannon Beach or Bend. Ava declined immediately. Said she had plans. Gregory let it drop. I started noticing the way she talked about him more and more. "Dad says this, Dad says that. He's going to help me get into a better internship. He knows people at the university. He might even get me something nicer than this car when I graduate." One night, I found a brochure on the kitchen counter for the exact Porsche model she'd mentioned. The corner dog-eared her name scribbled across the top in loopy cursive. I didn't say anything, just folded it in half and dropped it into the recycling bin. I wanted to believe it was just a phase. That every teenager goes through this. That she'd grow out of it eventually, recognize the love behind the things I did, the life I tried to give her. But every time she said Julianne instead of Mom, every time she chose to praise Gregory's empty promises over my quiet constancy, something inside me pulled further back. That summer, when she announced she'd be spending most of her break in Florida with her grandmother and father, I didn't argue. I helped her pack. I folded her clothes with care, slipped an extra charger into her bag, left a granola bar in the side pocket just in case. She didn't hug me goodbye. Just waved from the passenger seat and called out, "Thanks for everything, Julianne." I smiled. And for the first time, I didn't feel it. The house felt different that summer. Quieter, lighter in some ways, like the tension had been packed up and taken with Ava to Florida. Leah noticed it too. She spent more time in the kitchen with me, helping with orders for wedding centerpieces, humming along to the radio while she arranged eucalyptus and white roses in tall glass vases. I didn't ask about Ava. Neither did Gregory. Her name floated in the air like steam off hot pavement, visible for a moment then gone. A few weeks after she left, I saw her tag pop up on a Facebook post from Helen Benson, Gregory's mother. The caption read, "My beautiful granddaughter back where she belongs." Ava was smiling in the photo, wearing a sundress I'd never seen before, holding a glass of sweet tea in a backyard filled with plastic lawn chairs and a crooked American flag. Helen stood beside her, arm around her shoulder, beaming. I scrolled through the comments. One from Gregory's wife Dina said, "We're so lucky to have her with us this summer. Truly part of the family again." Another from someone I didn't know simply said, "Glad she's finally with her real people." I closed the app and stared out the window for a long time. The sky was clear that day, the kind of pale blue Portland only gets in August. I watched a pair of crows circle the telephone wires, then flew off in opposite directions. Ava started calling Gregory more often after that. I could tell by the way he spoke in hushed tones behind closed doors, always ending the call with, "Take care, sweetheart," or "Love you too." I didn't resent him for it, not at first. She was his daughter. Of course they needed to connect. But something shifted. She came back just before school started. Tanned, confident, carrying herself like someone who'd been told she mattered in every conversation. Leah ran to hug her. Ava returned it stiffly, distracted, her phone buzzing in her hand. She spent most of that first week in her room on video calls or texting. I overheard snippets, her saying things like, "I'm just staying here till graduation and I can't wait to get back to Florida." Once, while making dinner, I caught her on the phone with a friend. She didn't know I was within earshot. I heard her say, "Yeah, she's fine, I guess. I mean, she's not my mom or anything, just the woman I live with." The words sliced clean through me. I stood still for a moment, my hand frozen over a pot of boiling water, and let them settle in the air. Leah was setting the table nearby. She paused, watching me, her eyes narrowing. She didn't say anything until Ava disappeared upstairs. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "You've done everything for her." I shook my head. "She's still figuring things out." "No," Leah said. She's just being mean. Gregory came home late that night. I told him what I'd heard. He sighed, pulled off his tie, and said maybe I was being too sensitive. Ava was almost 19 after all. She was going through a phase. Maybe we should give her space. I wanted to scream, not because of Ava. Because of him. Because of how easy it was for him to dismiss the ways I kept showing up only to be treated like furniture. Always present, never acknowledged. A few days later, I found an open browser tab on the kitchen laptop. Wedding mood boards. Soft pastels. Mason jars, lace. And at the bottom a message thread with her grandmother Helen. Helen had written, "When the time comes we'll do it right. A proper family wedding. Not with that woman hovering over everything." Ava had replied with a heart emoji and a message that read, "I want you to walk me down the aisle." I closed the laptop gently. My hands trembled, but not from shock. From confirmation. The next weekend, Leah and I were baking banana bread. She was talking about school clubs and asking if she could try out for the debate team when Ava walked in, grabbed a bottle of water, and mumbled something under her breath. Leah looked up and asked, "Did you just say something?" Ava rolled her eyes. "Just talking to myself." Then she turned and walked out of the room, muttering loud enough for both of us to hear. "This house is so fake sometimes." Leah slammed the mixing spoon on the counter. "She's awful. I don't get why you let her walk around like she owns the place." I wiped my hands on a dish towel. "Because I made a promise," I said. "Because when I said yes to Gregory, I said yes to her too." Leah looked down at the bowl of batter. "Well, maybe she doesn't deserve that promise anymore." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not without crying. Later that night I checked Ava's phone bill. Not to snoop, just to verify. The majority of her calls were to Florida, long ones. Daily. I knew then that this wasn't just a phase or a distance of personality. It was a slow extraction. She was pulling herself away cell by cell, rebuilding her identity with people who wanted me erased. That's when I stopped calling her my daughter to other people. Not out of spite. Out of preservation. I didn't know it yet, but the real fracture hadn't even begun. That part was coming. And it would start with a dress. The morning Ava announced her engagement, she came into the kitchen holding out her left hand like a trophy. The ring was delicate rose gold with a small oval diamond that sparkled under the pendant light above the island. She didn't say anything right away, just stood there waiting for a reaction. I smiled and walked over, pretending to study it closely. "It's beautiful," I said. "Congratulations." She shrugged like it was no big deal, then grabbed a granola bar and started scrolling her phone. Leah walked in a moment later, still in pajama pants, and I saw her freeze when she caught sight of the ring. Ava didn't look up, just said, "I'm getting married next spring. Probably May. Depends on the venue." Gregory clapped her on the back later that day and offered to take her fiancé out for lunch. It all moved quickly after that. Discussions turned to dresses, colors, venues, vendors. And even before anyone officially asked, I offered to pay. I wanted to believe it was a second chance. A way to rebuild something that had cracked so deeply it no longer resembled the shape of family. I told myself this would be the moment Ava would see what I had given her all these years. That maybe, just maybe, she'd look at me differently even just once. $75,000. That was the number I committed to. Quietly. No announcements. I just started making calls. I had contacts in the business, people who owed me favors, artists I'd worked with for years. I called Angela Green, one of the best planners in Portland, and told her we had a wedding to build. I designed a mood board. Soft lilac, dusty blue, hints of gold. We found a venue just outside Hood River, surrounded by pine trees and overlooking the Columbia River Gorge. It was stunning in spring. Angela booked it within a week. We toured bridal boutique. I sat on white velvet benches while Ava modeled dress after dress. Leah came to one of the fittings and tried on a few dresses herself just for fun. Ava didn't smile much, but she didn't frown either. I took it as a win. I remember one afternoon Ava and I were going through fabric swatches at the studio. I showed her a velvet runner that I thought would tie the tables together beautifully. She stared at it for a moment, then said flatly, My grandma says velvet's too old-fashioned. I folded it quietly and set it aside. From then on, I noticed small shifts. Angela started emailing Ava directly instead of looping me in. Calendar invites for vendor meetings never came to my phone anymore. I asked Ava about it once, and she said, "Oh, I figured you were busy." You trust me, right? Of course, I trusted her. That wasn't the point. I tried not to read into it. I told myself this was her day. She was taking ownership, stepping into womanhood. Maybe it was healthy. Maybe letting go was part of loving. Then the guest list came in. Printed copies laid out on the table in Angela's office, complete with seating charts and family tables. I scanned the names, looking for mine, wondering which table I'd be seated at. It took me too long to find it. Table 12. Near the back. Between old family friends and a vendor rep from the photographer's team. I looked up at Angela confused. She blinked. "Oh, I thought you were just handling support." "I mean with the budget and design." "I didn't realize." "Your family," I didn't answer. Later that night, I sat across from Gregory in our living room, the list still clutched in my hand. "Did you know about this?" I asked. He rubbed his temples. Ava wanted to handle it herself. She said she was trying to keep it balanced. Balanced. I'm seated behind her great aunt who hasn't spoken to her in a decade. He sighed. "Look, it's her wedding." I felt something crack inside me, small but permanent. The following week, Leah came home from school with red eyes. I asked her what was wrong, and she hesitated before answering. Ava told her friends I wasn't going to be in the bridal party because I didn't match the aesthetic. She said I was too short and didn't fit the color palette. I stared at her, stunned. "You're her sister," I whispered. Leah shrugged, but I could see it hurt deeper than she let on. I offered to talk to Ava, but Leah shook her head. "She won't change her mind. She's already replaced me with a cousin from Florida." I found Ava in the backyard later that evening, sitting on the porch, scrolling. "Why isn't Leah in your bridal party?" She looked up, not defensive, just bored. "It's my wedding, Julianne. I get to choose who I want standing with me." I nodded slowly. "And me? What am I in all of this?" She tilted her head. "You're paying for it." That's kind of enough, right? I felt my heart still in my chest, not because it was shocking, but because I knew she meant it. That night, I walked into the guest room and pulled out the file folder with every receipt, every contract, every deposit I had made for her wedding. I laid them out across the bed one by one, until the whole thing looked like a blueprint for a house I never planned to live in. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the numbers. The silence in the house settled like a weight around my shoulders. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a transaction, and I was being written out of it line by line. The final seating chart arrived in a cream-colored envelope with gold embossing. Angela had couriered it over herself, tucked in a branded folder with matching sample place cards. I opened it at the kitchen table, a knife still in my hand from chopping carrots for dinner. Leah sat across from me reading a textbook, flipping through pages with the quiet determination of someone who knew grades were her escape route from everything else. I unfolded the chart, slowly tracing the names with my finger. Gregory and Ava's father listed at table 1, center of the head family row. Dina beside him, listed simply as stepmother. Ava's grandmother Helen flanking the other end, listed as matriarch. Table 2 held cousins and extended family from Florida. Table 3 was for the groom's family. Table 4 childhood friends. I kept scanning. Table 12. That was mine. Next to a family friend of Gregory's I'd never met, and a photographer's assistant listed only by first name. I stared at it for so long my coffee went cold. Leah noticed first. "Is your name even on the front page?" I didn't answer. She got up, walked around the table, and looked for herself. "Table 12, she whispered. "Are they serious?" I folded the chart and set it aside. "She's stressed." I'm sure she didn't think it through. Leah crossed her arms. "No, she thought it through. She made sure you weren't sitting anywhere near the people who matter to her." I sighed and turned back to the stove. Leah kept her eyes on me. "Mom, if you weren't my mom, I'd still pick you." The words cracked something in my chest. That night after dinner, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the floor of the guest room surrounded by folders. I flipped through the signed contracts, vendor schedules, fabric samples, floral mock-ups. Each one a piece of myself I'd given without being asked, hoping it might mean something. Hoping she might see me. Feel me in every soft blush tone, every candlelit centerpiece. I wasn't building a wedding. I'd been building a bridge. And now I could see it burning from both ends. The next day, I got an email from Angela asking for the final check. The last installment. $22,000 due by Friday. I didn't reply. Not yet. That evening, I asked Gregory to meet me outside. We sat on the porch, the air cool but not cold, trees rustling lightly under a pale orange sky. Did you ask her to move me to the back? I said. He looked confused for a second. What do you mean, on the chart, table 12? He rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't know where she'd put you. She's been working closely with Angela and Helen. I figured she had a plan. She does, I said. It just doesn't include me. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Gregory, I'm not listed as her mother. Not in the program. Not in the toasts. Not in the family photos schedule. But I'm the one paying. He didn't meet my eyes. She wants her dad to be the one who understands her, he said softly. She told me that last week. That I know what she wants. I nodded slowly. So what am I? He didn't answer. I stood up, took the folder of paperwork inside, and set it on my desk. Then I pulled out the file I'd kept separate. Bank records, contracts, email threads. Everything under my name, my company, my money. I called Mark, my attorney. If I cancel everything, is there anything they can hold me liable for? He asked a few questions, had me scan over a few details. Then he said plainly, you're the legal signatory on every contract. Nothing's been transferred. You can withdraw your services at any time. Just make sure it's written. No phone calls. I thanked him and hung up. Then I opened my laptop and began typing. To Angela. To the venue. To the caterer. To the florist. To the photographer. To the rentals company. Each email was short, polite, firm. Due to a change in family arrangements, we will no longer be sponsoring the Benson wedding scheduled for May 18. Please consider this formal notice of cancellation and release from all obligations. Let me know if final paperwork is needed. Each click of send felt like stitching a wound I had let fester too long. When Leah came into my room an hour later, I was still sitting at the desk, empty wine glass beside me, eyes sore. She walked over, hugged me without saying a word, and sat down on the carpet. What now? She whispered. Now, I said quietly. We watch what happens when someone builds a celebration on a foundation of erasure. Neither of us said anything else that night. The house felt still, like it knew something had shifted. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels almost rehearsed. Leah had gone to bed early, sensing the heaviness in the air. Gregory was still at work, or maybe avoiding home. I didn't ask. I didn't care. I made myself a second cup of coffee at 10:30, poured it black, and sat at the kitchen table with every file, invoice, receipt, and email printout stacked in neat piles. The glow from the laptop screen lit up the room with a cold, bluish light. I opened the financial tracker first. Vendor deposits, payment schedules, due dates. Every cent came from my account, my business. I had used Carter and Company events to handle all transactions. It was smart, clean, legal, no shared names. No room for argument. By midnight, I had read every line 3 times. I opened the shared college fund next. It was a savings account I'd started when Ava was 14. Every month I deposited the same amount into 2 accounts, one for her, one for Leah. No one had asked me to. I did it because I believed in fairness and opportunity, in giving both girls the same springboard. By then, Ava's account had over $120,000. Leah's had just passed 90. I stared at the screen, my hand hovering over the mouse. I thought about the way Ava had thanked me that day in the driveway, not for the Highlander, but like she was checking off a polite box. I thought about her words at the porch swing, saying her dad knew what she wanted. I thought about my name buried at table 12 like an afterthought. And then I clicked transfer. The entire balance from Ava's fund moved into Leah's with two-factor authentication and a single confirmation screen. It was done. No dramatics, no warning. Just math and silence. After that, I opened my email. Angela first. Her reply came within 10 minutes short and clipped. Sorry to hear that. Please advise who to contact regarding replacements. Best of luck. Then the florist. Then the venue. Then the lighting team, the photographer, the baker. Every one of them responded within an hour, some with confusion, some with professionalism, a few with warmth. I didn't owe them explanations. I pulled up a spreadsheet of local nonprofits that organized pro bono weddings for families in crisis. I sent the full event package venue vendors, designs floral plans to one in Eugene. Told them it was fully paid for, and theirs if they could use it. The coordinator called me within minutes. She was crying. She said she knew a couple whose wedding had been canceled due to a medical bankruptcy. I told her I hoped it helped. I didn't give my name. By 3 a.m, it was all gone. Off my books. Off my heart. I sat back, eyes dry, body humming with exhaustion and clarity. Then I opened a blank document. No title. Just white space. I started writing a letter to myself. Not to Ava. Not to Gregory. To me. You loved her. That was real. But you're not required to keep loving someone who weaponizes your kindness. You built a home. You built a future. You bent so far for others that you lost sight of where you end. Tonight you stopped bending. At some point I fell asleep at the table, cheek resting on my arm, laptop still open beside me. I woke to the sound of footsteps. Leah stood in the doorway in her robe, eyes puffy, hair sticking up on one side. You didn't come to bed. I looked at the clock. 6:40. I'm okay, I said. She crossed the kitchen and sat beside me, looking at the mess of papers, the glowing screen. Did you do it? I nodded. Her face didn't move. But she reached over, took my hand, and squeezed it hard. Good. She got up, poured herself some cereal, and sat in silence while I closed the laptop and turned off the desk light. I didn't go to work that day, neither did she. Gregory came home around noon. I was in the garden pruning the hydrangeas. He walked out, hands in his pockets, guilt painted all over his face. Ava just called me, he said. I waited. She said the florist canceled. So did the photographer. Angela's not responding. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stood up straight. They're not responding because they're not working the wedding anymore. He looked confused, then wary. Why? Because it's not my wedding, I said. And I'm done pretending I belong in it. His eyes widened. Julianne. You can't just pull everything. You said I know what I said. I said yes when I thought I was family, when I thought I mattered, when I thought I was building something with people who saw me. He was quiet. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of lavender and earth. She's upset. So was I. For years. He didn't try to argue. Just walked back toward the house like a man realizing too late what silence had cost him. That evening, Leah and I ordered pizza, sat on the living room floor, and watched old home videos. Birthdays, school plays, Christmas mornings. Most of them starred Leah. A few had Ava in the background, stiff and uncertain, never quite stepping into the frame. At one point, Leah leaned her head on my shoulder. You know, she said softly, you're the best mom I know. I kissed the top of her head. Thanks, baby. And then we sat there not saying another word while the footage kept playing of a time when I still believed that love alone could make someone feel like yours. 2 days before the wedding, my phone didn't ring once. Not a text, not a call, not an email. But I could feel the ripple begin. It started when Angela called Ava directly and told her everything had fallen apart. The venue was closed off. The floral delivery had been rerouted. The photographer had filled the slot with another client. Her dress, the one she had claimed fit her like it was made for her alone, was now being worn by a young bride from Eugene who had just finished her last round of chemo and never expected to walk down the aisle. Ava lost it. Gregory told me later, though not with much detail. He came home and sat on the edge of the bed like a man who didn't know how to say the words. His phone was buzzing every few minutes. He ignored it. She's panicking, he said quietly. Everything's gone. I didn't look at him. I just folded a towel and set it on the shelf. She thought I was bluffing. He rubbed his face, sighed. Dina won't pay for anything else. She says Ava's not her daughter and this isn't her problem. That part didn't surprise me. Dina had never liked Ava's existence intruding on her carefully controlled image of Gregory's second life. What are they doing now? He hesitated. They're trying to plan something smaller. Maybe at our house. Backyard. Something quick and simple. A barbecue wedding, I said, still not turning toward him. He didn't answer. The next day, Leah showed me the Facebook post. Wedding update, change of plans. Going intimate and casual. Backyard vibes. Grateful for the people who really matter. Below it was a photo of Ava standing with her fiancé on Gregory's back patio. The grass was patchy, the folding chairs mismatched. A string of dollar store fairy lights hung from the gutter. She smiled for the camera, but even through the pixels I could see the tightness around her eyes. Leah scrolled through the comments, lips pressed into a thin line. People are asking if the venue canceled on her, she said. Some think it's a weather issue. Let them guess. Leah tilted her head. Do you want to watch the live stream? I shook my head. But she did. I didn't stop her. The stream started late, shaky and pixelated. Someone's uncle was trying to figure out the phone tripod. You could hear dogs barking in the background and the wind rustling through a cheap pop-up tent. Ava walked out wearing a different dress. Simpler, less tailored. It didn't quite fit in the shoulders. The music came through a Bluetooth speaker with a dying battery. The officiant was a neighbor who kept losing his place in the vows. Gregory looked stiff in a suit that hadn't been ironed. Helen dabbed at her forehead with a napkin and whispered too close to the mic. Dina stood off to the side, arms crossed, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. Leah snorted once, then covered her mouth. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry either. I just stood at the window watching our rose bushes sway gently in the breeze. Ava never looked at the camera. Not once. I heard through someone else later that there had been a fight. Gregory and Ava screaming in the kitchen when it became clear the caterer wasn't coming. That the MC had blocked her number after she kept calling. That the backup photographer brought by a friend forgot to charge his camera battery and ended up taking pictures on a phone. No one talked about it at work. Angela stayed quiet. The vendors knew not to mention my name. My professional reputation remained intact, cleaner than ever. If anything, people assumed I had withdrawn for personal reasons, which wasn't untrue. What no one knew was how quiet revenge could be. How powerful silence becomes when it walks into a room someone thought they controlled and simply steps aside. Leah and I went for ice cream that night. Saturday, on a bench near the park, her feet swinging under her seat. Do you think she gets it now? She asked. I licked my cones slowly, watching a couple push a stroller along the path. She'll understand something. Maybe not everything, but enough. Leah nodded. She didn't press. When we got home, I found a message waiting for me in my inbox. Subject line: damage control. It was from Gregory. Julianne, she's devastated. Can we please talk? I didn't open it. I moved it to a folder labeled closed. I didn't know him anything. I didn't know her anything. Not anymore. She wanted a celebration without the woman who raised her. She got exactly what she planned. Just not how she imagined. Ava didn't come back to our house after the wedding. She moved in with Gregory, and Dina said she needed time to adjust and think. I didn't argue. I didn't reach out. I didn't ask when she would be by to collect the rest of her things. What was hers could stay. What was mine had already gone quiet. Leah and I filled our days with small routines. Work, school, errands, Sunday pancakes. The absence didn't feel like a hole. It felt like a room that had finally stopped echoing. One night I came home late from a consultation and found Leah sitting on the couch with her laptop open, headphones on, eyebrows scrunched together. She looked up when I came in. She's staying in the guest room over there, she said flatly. Gregory's house. I didn't ask how she knew. I didn't need to. Dina won't let her use the upstairs bathroom. Said she doesn't want her things mixed in. I set down my bag and coat. That's not surprising. Leah pulled off her headphones and shut the laptop. And Helen's been calling her Ava Jane again like she's 5. She told someone on speakerphone that Ava's just waiting for Gregory to finally put her name on something like a will or a deed. Called her inheritance material. I sat down slowly beside her. She's not even hiding it anymore, Leah added. They treat her like a guest. Or, worse. She went quiet, then looked at me. You okay? I nodded. Leah hesitated, then said, I heard her last night. Ava. Heard her how she was on the phone, I think with Madison. She didn't know I was around the corner, she was crying. Leah paused again, like repeating the words felt heavy. She said, I thought I chose the right side, but it's hell here. I leaned back, folded my hands in my lap, and stared at the ceiling. I didn't say anything at first. Then I said, sometimes people only understand warmth after they've stood in the cold long enough. Leah pulled a blanket over her legs and didn't answer. She didn't need to. Later that week, I went to the grocery store and bumped into one of Ava's old teachers. She smiled politely, asked how the wedding went. I gave a vague answer, something about it being a quiet affair, close family. She nodded, then added that she'd seen Ava downtown recently looking tired, thinner than usual. Said she hoped she was doing well. I told her I hoped so too. Back at home, I opened the freezer and stared at the unopened container of Ava's favorite ice cream I'd bought 2 weeks earlier. It had started to crystallize at the corners. I shut the door and moved on. The next few days were quiet. I heard through a neighbor that Gregory was back at work full-time. Dina had started locking the upstairs fridge and keeping certain groceries in a mini fridge in their bedroom. Ava was asked not to touch anything that wasn't labeled. Leah told me that Ava had called a few times, mostly late at night, always whispering. Said things like, I didn't think it would be like this, and they said it'd feel like home. Leah never told her what I said, never offered sympathy, just listened. I admired that about her. The ability to witness someone else's unraveling without stepping in to cushion the fall. One afternoon, Leah came into my office and sat down without a word. I was updating a client file and didn't look up at first. She asked me if I missed Ava. I paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I miss what I hoped she would become, I said. Leah nodded slowly. Do you think she'll ever say sorry? I turned and met her eyes. Maybe. But that's not the part that matters anymore. She didn't ask what did. She just got up, walked to the kitchen, and started making tea. That night, I lay awake and thought about all the ways love gets tangled up with expectation. I had loved Ava the best I knew how. Not perfectly. Not always wisely, but fully. I had folded her laundry with care, left notes in her lunchbox, cried behind closed doors when she refused to hug me. I had done it all without contracts or bloodlines. Just choice. But the thing about choice is it's only as strong as the person choosing you back. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they choose the spotlight, the louder voice, the promise that feels easier. Until it isn't. Until they realize that being claimed by name doesn't mean being cared for in practice. And by then the door behind them has already closed. The porch light had just flickered on when I heard the knock at the door. Soft at first, like whoever stood on the other side wasn't sure they deserved to be there. Then again, a little louder. A pause. One final knock. I stood in the hallway staring at the door, not moving. My hands were damp from washing dishes, the towel still draped over my shoulder. I knew before opening it who it was. There was only one person who would knock like that. When I opened the door, Ava stood on the threshold. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner too, like life had carved something out of her in the time she'd been gone. Her hair was pulled back hastily, her eyes red and puffy. She held a duffel bag at her side, the strap digging into her shoulder, but she didn't seem to notice. Hi, she whispered, voice barely carrying past the doorway. I didn't say anything. I didn't reach for her. I didn't step aside. She blinked quickly, trying to hold herself together. I could see her throat tighten, her knuckles white around the strap of the bag. Can I come in? Still, I said nothing. Her mouth trembled. Then finally the tears came. Quiet, embarrassed tears, the kind that aren't about getting what you want but realizing what you lost. I'm sorry, she said. I really messed up. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. She wiped her nose with the sleeve of her jacket like she used to do when she was a child before all the distance, before she learned to use words like that woman instead of mom. I thought going with them would fix something, she said. I thought maybe if I made a choice, things would be clearer. But I was wrong. I've never felt more disposable. She took a shaky breath. They called me her. They made me eat alone. Dina kept the door to the pantry locked. I wasn't allowed to use the washer without asking. Grandma Helen said I should be grateful just to have a roof over my head, and Dad, he just kept saying, things are tense right now. Give it time. She looked down, shaking her head. I don't know what I was chasing. I think I just didn't want to feel like a guest anymore. But instead, I became one. Everywhere. I stood there for a long time studying her face. She looked older, not in years, but in something deeper. The kind of aging that only comes when the world stops giving you grace. Please, she said again. I don't want to go back there. I don't know where else to go. Her voice broke again. Can I come home? I stepped aside. You can stay, I said. You can sleep in your old room. You can shower here, eat here, rest here. She nodded, quickly relieved. The bag dropped from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a thud. But I added, I'm not your mother anymore. She froze. I don't say that to hurt you, I said. I say it because I need to protect what I have left. I gave you everything I could. I gave you years. Patience. Grace. Love. A home. And when you had the chance to return even an ounce of that, you chose to erase me. Her eyes filled again, but she didn't look away. You walked away from this family and told the world who mattered to you. And it wasn't me. I paused. You may live here. But if you disrespect me again even once, this door will never open for you again. Ava didn't speak. She just nodded. Once. Slow. Like her body finally accepted something her heart had been avoiding. Leah had been watching from the hallway. She stepped forward, quietly picked up Ava's bag, and gave her a small nod. Come on, she said gently. I'll take you upstairs. Ava followed without a word. I watched them climb the stairs together, Leah one step ahead, her back straight, Ava just behind her, clutching the railing. When they disappeared around the landing, I turned and walked back to the living room. The same throw blanket was draped over the arm of the couch. I sat down slowly, the cushions familiar beneath me, the hum of the old fridge filling the quiet. From where I sat, I could still see the front door. The light outside cast a soft glow through the curtain. Everything looked exactly as it had before. But everything had changed. I reached for the remote, set it down again without turning the television on. My hands rested in my lap. Still. Steady. Upstairs, the faint sound of drawers opening. Leah's voice soft, asking if Ava needed extra towels. Ava answering with a quiet thank you. The house held the weight of return. Not reunion. Not redemption. Just return. And I realized then the difference between reopening your door and reopening your heart. One was about space. The other was about trust. Only one of them had been offered that night. And the other. That would take more than tears to earn back. The next few days passed without much noise. Ava kept to herself mostly. She came and went quietly, never asked for anything, never offered anything either. She didn't sit with us at meals. She'd grab leftovers from the fridge after we'd finished heating them up in silence, sometimes eating alone at the counter without turning on a single light. It wasn't cold exactly, just distant. Measured. She moved through the house like a tenant, not a daughter. Leah didn't go out of her way to talk to her, but she didn't avoid her either. If Ava was in the room, Leah would acknowledge her presence, nothing more. I didn't press for anything beyond civility. That was enough. There were no more birthdays discussed. No invitations to help decorate for holidays. I didn't leave sticky notes on her door like I used to. I didn't fold her laundry. She did it herself now, quietly, early in the morning or late at night. I knew because I'd hear the hum of the washer under the floorboards around 2 a.m. One evening I was cooking dinner and Leah was setting the table. We kept it simple now. No extra place settings, no waiting to see if Ava would come down. I had learned not to anticipate. I heard footsteps from the stairs. Ava appeared at the edge of the kitchen, holding an empty glass in one hand. She hovered near the fridge silent. Leah glanced up from the silverware. Ava shifted her weight, opened the fridge door, grabbed a bottle of water, and turned to leave. I kept stirring the sauce. Then I heard her voice. Soft, unguarded, the kind of voice that slips out before the brain has time to build defenses. "Mom, do you know where?" She stopped. The word hung in the air like smoke. Ava froze mid-sentence. Leah straightened her back slowly and turned toward her. My hands didn't stop moving, but my heart did. Leah walked toward her, not rushed, not angry. Calm. Centered. She looked Ava in the eye and said, "My mom doesn't need someone who calls her mom. She needs someone who understands what it means to be one." Ava didn't reply. Her eyes welled, but she blinked fast, swallowed whatever she was about to say. Then slowly she walked over to the sink, set her glass down, and looked at the pile of used dishes from dinner prep. Without a word, she turned on the tap, rolled up her sleeves, and started rinsing. Leah looked at me. I gave her the smallest nod. She returned to the table. Ava didn't rush. She scrubbed the pots, rinsed plates, even dried them and put them back in the right cabinets. I stayed where I was chopping vegetables, watching from the corner of my eye. It wasn't a performance. There was no show in it. Just motion. Repetition. Quiet. When she finished, she wiped down the counters and stood for a moment like she wasn't sure what to do next. Leah cleared her throat and said, "You should label your leftovers if you want to keep them. Otherwise, I'm taking the last enchilada." Ava let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but close. "Okay," she said. "Noted." Then she turned and walked out of the kitchen. Leah and I ate our dinner in peace. No questions, no discussions. Just the normal rhythm we'd built. Later that night, I passed Ava's room on my way to bed. Her door was cracked open just enough for me to see inside. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, laptop, open, headphones on, eyes tired but focused. There were papers around her, notes, maybe a resume. She had cleared a small corner of her space, made a workspace for herself like she used to when she was 16 and trying to study for exams. I didn't knock, I just kept walking. Somewhere around midnight, I went to get a glass of water and found the kitchen spotless. The dish towel was folded neatly beside the sink and a sticky note was left on the counter. "Thanks for dinner." The sauce was really good. No name. Just that. I left it there. The next morning, Leah noticed it and said nothing. She just picked it up, read it, and placed it inside the back of one of the cookbooks on the shelf. She didn't need me to say anything either. Ava had come back. But not as a daughter. Not yet. Now she was something else. A guest, maybe. Or a former flame of a bond that still glowed under the ashes. And though she had called me mom once out loud and raw, I hadn't answered. Because names aren't earned in moments. They're earned in what you do after. It happens slowly, the way peace always does. Not with an explosion, not with confetti or applause, just in small, steady waves. A quiet morning when no one raised their voice. A dinner where no one looked at the clock. A passing glance that didn't carry weight. I didn't wake up one day feeling healed, but I stopped waking up angry. And that was enough. I had spent so many years giving everything I had to a role that didn't want me. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because some people only know how to love when it benefits them. And when the benefits run dry, so does their loyalty. I didn't destroy anything. I didn't burn bridges or scream at doorways. I didn't post long essays on social media or beg anyone to see what I had done for them. I just stopped holding the net. And when I did, they fell. People like to imagine that revenge is loud. That it comes in the form of slashed tires or shattered glasses or shouting matches in the rain. But real revenge is quiet. It's administrative. It's canceling bookings and transferring funds and printing out contracts with a different name in the beneficiary box. It's letting people sit in the chaos they created because they were too proud to believe it could collapse. Gregory never asked for me to take him back. He called a few times. Left voicemails filled with half-hearted apologies and vague regrets. I never returned them. Eventually, they stopped. I think he realized that the person who had once filled in the gaps for everyone had stepped back for good. Ava stayed in the house. She paid rent now. cleaned after herself, said thank you after dinner. She didn't ask for anything else and I didn't offer. She once tried to hand me a card on Mother's Day. I told her it wasn't necessary. She nodded and didn't insist. She's learning. Slowly. She makes herself useful in ways she never did before. Fills the gas tank when she borrows the car. Takes Leah to school when I'm running late. Offers to run errands without being prompted. But still I keep my distance. Not because I'm bitter, I'm not. Not anymore. It's because I've learned that love given freely should not become a debt. And if it does, it's no longer love. One afternoon, I sat at my desk in the studio with a cup of tea and a manila envelope beside me. Inside was a scholarship contract. I had partnered with a local women's education foundation to sponsor 2 students each year full tuition for their undergraduate studies. The foundation asked if I wanted to name the scholarship after my business. I said no. I wanted it named after someone else. I flipped open the contract, read through the final page, and paused at the signature line. It read primary benefactor and academic guardian. I signed my name. Below it was a line that said first recipient. I wrote Leah Carter, my daughter. My constant. The one who had never made me question what family meant. When I finished, I sat back in my chair, letting the sun warm the edge of my face through the studio window. The printer hummed softly in the background. The scent of fresh eucalyptus and clean paper filled the air. It was quiet. Not empty, just quiet. I looked around the room, the shelves filled with folded linens and floral samples, the corkboard lined with sketches of table arrangements and seasonal mood boards. This was the life I had built. No one gave it to me. No one protected it for me. I had done it. Through disappointment, betrayal, and loneliness, I had kept going. And now I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I wasn't waiting for someone to call me mom. I wasn't waiting to be thanked. I was just living. That night, Leah came home from school with a paper in her hand, grinning. Scholarship notification, she said. I got it. I hugged her. A real hug. One that said more than any words. I know, I whispered. I know you did. She pulled back and looked at me. You okay? I nodded. I'm better than okay. Later, as she went upstairs, Ava passed through the hallway watching us with quiet eyes. She didn't interrupt. Just gave me a look that was half apology, half gratitude. I didn't respond. She still had her journey. Mine was done. I walked outside, sat on the back porch with a glass of iced tea and watched the sky shift from gold to gray. For the first time in years, I felt light, not numb. Not hard, just light. People think revenge is about destruction. But the truth, I didn't set them on fire. They lit the match themselves. I just stopped carrying water. Have you ever been pushed out of something you built with your own hands? Have you ever chosen silence over rage? Share your story. I read every word. Let's talk about it.